The evening sun melted into the western horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the dusty plain. A wind stirred the mesquite, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke, not from a wildfire, but from a campfire left burning low. The cowboy's horse stopped of its own accord, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. He narrowed his eyes beneath the brim of his hat and saw movement near the dry creek bed. At first he thought it was coyotes nosing around, but then he heard it, a faint, broken whisper, trembling like it barely had the strength to be spoken. "Please don't hurt us." His hand went to the butt of his revolver, but when the figures emerged from behind the scrub, his grip faltered. Two girls stood there, no taller than his chest, hair black as midnight, eyes wide and wet with terror. They were twins, Apache by their dress and their features, and they clung to each other like two birds trying to survive the same storm. The elder by a few minutes had her arm wrapped tight around the younger, shielding her from his shadow as though he were one more predator among many. Her small voice broke again. "Our ma's dying." The cowboy felt something cold stir in his gut. He had ridden long enough to know these lands were no place for children alone. Apache or settler, it made no difference. Out here, the desert did not care about bloodlines, and cruelty ran thicker than water. He slid from his horse slowly, letting the reins fall slack, his palms raised in peace. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said, his voice low and steady, the kind of tone a man used with skittish cattle ready to bolt. "Where's your ma?" The girls exchanged a look, a silent language between them, then the younger tugged at her sister's sleeve. Reluctantly, the older pointed. The morning came with a sky pale as bone, the first light spilling across the desert like water seeping into cracks. The cowboy roused himself, stiff from the night against the cold ground, and the girls were already awake, watching him silently with wide, expectant eyes. Their mother still lay weak, her breath rattling faintly but holding on. He checked the bandage. The bleeding had stopped, but the infection was deep, angry red streaks crawling outward. She needed herbs, medicine, something more than what he had. He looked at the twins, so thin their collarbones jutted like blades. He felt a weight settle heavy on his shoulders. He had stumbled into a storm not of his making, but it was his now. The younger girl tugged at his sleeve again and pointed east. "Healer," she whispered. The elder shook her head fiercely, a shadow crossing her face, and answered with a word in Apache that he couldn't understand, but the meaning was plain: danger. He understood enough. The healer was not far, but reaching them meant crossing territory patrolled by soldiers, and the sight of an armed cowboy riding with two Apache children and their wounded mother was a death sentence. Still, what choice did he have? Without help, the woman would not live another 2 nights. He mounted his horse and studied the trail, chewing the inside of his cheek until it bled. "If I ride," he muttered, "I ride with all of you. No one stays behind." The girls hesitated, their eyes darting between their mother and him, then they nodded. It was a pact made in silence. He fashioned a crude litter from branches in his bedroll, tying it behind the horse. The woman was light as a shadow when he lifted her, though she gasped faintly at the touch, her pain undeniable. He spoke softly to her as he secured her down, not knowing if she understood the words but hoping she could feel their steadiness. "You hold on now, we're moving you to better ground." The girls walked beside him, their tiny bare feet padding in the dust, never straying more than a hand's breadth from their mother's side. By midday, the sun was blazing, the kind that makes sweat sting like salt in the eyes. The cowboy's shirt clung to him, and the horse's flanks were wet. He scanned the horizon with the practiced eye of a man who had known ambush before. Buzzards circled faintly in the distance, lazy arcs against the white sky. The land was too still. That's when he heard it, the faint thunder of hooves. He cursed under his breath and drew the horse off the trail, guiding the girls and the litter into a dry gully lined with rocks and mesquite. "Quiet now," he whispered, crouching low. 3 riders appeared over the rise, dust trailing behind them. Soldiers. Their blue coats flashed in the sun, rifles slung, eyes scanning. One laughed at something the other said, the sound sharp and brittle in the empty land. The cowboy pressed a finger to his lips, and the twins nodded, their small faces pale but brave. He kept his hand close to his revolver, though he knew a gunfight would end them all. The riders passed within 50 yards, the clink of tack and the smell of horse sweat filling the air. For a moment, one turned his head, eyes narrowing as if he sensed movement. The cowboy held his breath until the man spat into the dirt and turned back. Finally, the hoofbeats faded into nothing. The girls sagged in relief, but he knew this was only the beginning. Word would spread of patrols, of raids. The West was on edge, white men and Apache locked in blood and vengeance. He could already feel the net tightening around them. But when he looked at the twins, one clutching a ragged doll carved from wood, the other still watching him with silent trust, he knew he'd ride into hell itself before he'd abandon them. That night they made camp near a cluster of cottonwoods by a trickling spring. He gathered what herbs he could remember, wild sage, yucca root, and boiled them into a bitter poultice, pressing it gently against the mother's wound. She stirred and moaned, but did not wake. The girls sat on either side, holding her hands, whispering prayers in their tongue. The cowboy turned his gaze to the stars above, endless and merciless. Once, he had believed himself a man cut loose from the world, beholden to no one. But now, with 2 children leaning on him and death stalking their mother, he felt the weight of belonging again, not to a land or a nation, but to lives that needed him. Sometime past midnight, he heard the faint cry of a coyote and the rustle of movement near the trees. His hand went to his rifle, and his body tensed, but it wasn't beasts that stepped into the firelight. It was men, Apache men, their eyes sharp, their faces painted with dust and anger. They saw him first, hand on weapon, and in an instant, the air was thick with the threat of blood. The girls leapt up, crying out in their tongue, standing between him and the newcomers, arms spread as if to shield him. Their voices rose, frantic, words tumbling too fast for him to catch. Slowly, the Apache warriors lowered their spears, confusion flickering across their faces as they took in the scene: the wounded woman, the makeshift litter, the white cowboy keeping watch. The leader of the group stepped forward, his eyes cold as steel. He barked a question, his voice sharp and accusing. The cowboy did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. He was trespasser, interloper, perhaps even enemy. His fingers itched against the stock of his rifle, but he did not move it. Instead, he lifted both hands, palms open, and spoke in the only way he could. "I don't mean harm. I'm trying to save her. Your children came to me." His words were useless to their ears, but his actions were plain. The girls turned to the warriors, their voices desperate, pleading. At last, the leader's gaze softened a fraction. He gave a short command, and 2 of the men stepped forward, lifting the woman gently. The cowboy exhaled in relief, though he knew the road ahead had only grown more dangerous. He was in their hands now, his fate tied to theirs. But when the older twin reached for his hand and held it tightly, her tiny fingers clutching like chains around his, he realized something: it wasn't his fate he was worried about anymore. It was theirs. The march into the Apache encampment was silent except for the shuffle of feet and the soft creak of leather. The cowboy walked behind the warriors, the twins pressed close at his sides, their little hands occasionally brushing his as if to anchor him. The mother was carried ahead, her limp body swaying gently in the warrior's arms. Torchlight glowed in the distance, fire against the ink of night, and the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat drifted toward them. As they entered the circle of lodges, dozens of eyes turned, suspicious, sharp. Murmurs rose like the buzz of insects, women drawing children close, men reaching for knives. He felt every gaze like a blade. He was an intruder, a white man in a place where his kind had brought only pain. The warriors laid the woman down in a lodge, and an elder with white braids leaned over her, examining the wound with steady hands. The cowboy stood outside, unsure if he would be allowed inside. He wanted to protest, to insist he'd done what he could, but the twins tugged his sleeve, silently begging him not to make a wrong move. He stayed still, his head in his hands, feeling like a ghost among the living. The murmurs swelled louder. A group of young men, faces painted red, broke from the circle and strode toward him, their eyes burning with hatred. One spat at his boots, another shoved him hard in the chest, sending him stumbling back. He didn't reach for his revolver. He didn't even raise his fists. He stood there, breathing hard, forcing himself to swallow the pride that clawed at him. He had learned long ago what it meant to fight, but now he understood what it meant not to. The twins darted in front of him, crying out, their words too fast for him to follow, but their bodies were shields. The sight made the young men falter, their anger cracking into something like confusion. One sneered and said something sharp, then shoved past, but the killing fire had dimmed. The cowboy wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said nothing. Hours passed before the elder emerged from the lodge. His lined face was unreadable, but the twins rushed forward, asking frantic questions. The elder answered with a calm tone, his hands gesturing with patience. The cowboy caught only fragments, but he understood enough. The mother still breathed, though she balanced on the edge of life. Herbs, rest, and time were needed. He exhaled, his shoulders loosening for the first time in days. But his relief was short-lived. The elder's gaze turned to him, weighing, judging, as if deciding whether this stranger was curse or blessing. That night, the cowboy was not given rest. He was led to the center of the encampment, where a fire blazed high, sparks lifting into the night sky. The tribe gathered in a wide circle, faces flickering in the glow. The elder spoke, his voice carrying authority, while warriors muttered agreement. Then the elder gestured at the cowboy, and silence fell. He realized he was being tested, judged not for words he could not speak, but for what he was willing to do. A warrior stepped forward, offering him a spear, and pointed toward the darkness beyond the firelight. The cowboy understood. They would measure his worth not by talk, but by courage. Without hesitation, he gripped the spear. Its weight was unfamiliar, heavier than the rifle that had become part of his arm, but he did not flinch. The elder spoke again, and two young warriors joined him, leading him into the night. They stopped near a ravine where coyotes howled, and the ground bore tracks, not of coyotes, but of something larger. Mountain lion. The test became clear. Kill, or be killed. The warriors waited, silent, their dark eyes reflecting starlight, while the cowboy crouched low, scanning the rocks. The lion struck fast, a blur of tawny muscle leaping from shadow. The cowboy rolled, the beast's claws raking the earth where he had been. He gripped the spear and drove it forward with all his strength. The point struck the lion's shoulder, glancing off bone, but the force spun the beast sideways. Snarling, it lunged again. He wrestled with it, its hot breath in his face, teeth snapping inches from his throat. His arm screamed with pain as claws shredded his sleeve. Then, with a roar of his own, he shoved the spear deep under its jaw. The lion collapsed, twitching, then lay still. For a long moment, the cowboy knelt there, chest heaving, blood dripping from his arm. The warriors said nothing, only watched. Then one stepped forward, touched the dead beast, and nodded. They cut free its claws and placed them in the cowboy's hand. A symbol, a sign. When they returned to camp, the elder lifted the claws for all to see, and a murmur of respect rippled through the circle. He had proven something tonight, not that he was Apache, not that he belonged, but that he was a man of courage who did not run when tested. The twins rushed to him, their little hands clutching his torn sleeve, eyes wide with awe and worry. He knelt down, meeting them eye to eye, and whispered, "It's all right. I'm still here." They hugged him fiercely, and for the first time since their paths had crossed, he felt not like a stranger, not like an outcast, but like a protector truly accepted. Around him, the circle of faces softened, suspicion thinning into something more complicated. Trust would not come in a night, but the seed had been planted. As dawn broke, the elder came to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Words were spoken, slow and deliberate. The twins translated in broken English, "You may stay, until she is well. You are not enemy, if you are true." The cowboy bowed his head, his throat tight with a feeling he hadn't known in years. He had come close to death, to rejection, yet now he stood at the edge of something different, a place where he was no longer alone, where two children looked at him as if he were the shield between them and the world. For a man who had lost everything once before, it was a gift more precious than gold.